Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tax Talk, broadcast by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. My name is Jordan Bateman, and I'm the British Columbia Director for the CTF. And joining us, as always, Paige MacPherson, Alberta Director. How you doing, Paige?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, Paige. It's very Canadian now. I got to ask you, how is the weather there?
Here it is. It's a little cold. It hasn't been too bad, but we do have snow on the ground, which, we do enjoy in most of the country. What about where you are, Jordan?
It has been one calendar year since a flake of snow has fallen in the lower mainland. So no complaints here, although a windstorm last night, and you're not going to believe it, it knocked one of my Christmas decorations off the house. So troubling times here in the lower mainland.
Times. And I heard you bought your kids a sled?
Yeah, I bought my kids a sled exactly a year ago, and then the snow stopped. So I apparently am a jinx. If you live in a cold place, buy a sled for your kids. It'll stop immediately.
He called it a jinx.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I want to thank everyone first for joining us here on this live blab for Tax Talk. Later on, we're going to talk in depth with Aaron Wudrick, who you see at the bottom of the screen there. He's our colleague and the CTF's federal director. We're going to talk about Prime Minister Trudeau's first legislative session, throne speeches today, what taxpayers should be on the lookout for, both good and bad. So stay tuned for that. Now, if it's your first time on Blab, lots of ways to connect with us live. On the right-hand side, you'll see a comment message box kind of area. You can type a message into the live chat there. If you type /Q before that message, a question will pop up on the on our screens, and we can kind of address that. You can also tweet us at Jordan Bateman and at Paige McP and at A Wudrick. And you can even, keep track of us through our website, taxpayer.com. And just so you're aware, the CTF is a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization dedicated to just three things: less waste, lower taxes, and more government accountability. So that's what frames all of the work that the three of us do, along with the rest of the CTF team. And if you're listening to this later as a podcast or a YouTube recording, you can email us. Email me at jbateman@taxpayer.com. And we'll address your questions next time if possible. All right. We always like to start with kind of a what's new, what's going on. Paige, anything exciting happening?
Here in Alberta, you know what? It's been a little bit slower now. We're all sort of starting to, I guess, let the carbon tax set in and think about just how much more we're going to be paying on our gas, how much more we're going to be paying on our home heating, on our food, on our clothes, on everything that moves. And I have to tell you, I guess what's really new here is that rural residents are really starting to be quite angry at the government in this province. They've passed something that's going to have a big impact on how farmers run their daily operations, called Bill 6 here. And when we look at that, in combination with the carbon tax, which is obviously going to have a disproportionately negative impact on rural residents, I can tell you that that segment of our population is not too happy with the government these days. So that's pretty much what we're dealing with in this province. How about you? What's up in the lower mainland of BC and across the province?
Well, can you circle back to Bill 6 for 1 second?
Sure.
I've read, and I admit Twitter is the worst place to get in-depth news analysis. But if I'm reading between the 140 characters correctly, it has something to do with unionizing farm workers?
Yeah, so farm workers are now going to be able to be unionized. A lot of farmers are none too happy about that. In addition, there's going to be something where farm workers, employees on the farm, are going to have to be subject to workers' compensation board. Whereas what's been happening really in the meantime in our province is that farmers have been, their own insurance, their own private insurance. Some people have, through voluntary means, gone and purchased workers' compensation board for their employees. But by and large, I think it's been sort of private and independently managed. Now the government is saying, well, you have to be part of this workers' compensation board. A lot of people are saying that is more or less a payroll tax. And I think that the biggest problem with it is that the government didn't seem to have done any consultation with farmers at all. And that's why we're seeing these rallies. I think over 1,000 people at the legislature. That's happened twice now. There was a rally here in the Calgary area in Okotoks. There's been rallies across the province, hundreds of people every time, people saying, look, you're really impacting in a negative way the way that the family farm works, the way that kids are involved in the farm. They're not employees. people are asking, are kids on the farm going to be able to work without being an employee, without being a member of workers' compensation board? So there's a lot of big questions now that the government is having a bit of a hard time answering. And I think that rural residents and the province really just feel like they haven't been listened to, and they're going to be paying a lot into these kinds of policies, and their lifestyle is going to hurt because of it.
Yeah, well, it's such a strange time in Alberta, because here you've had 4 decades of the same party and basically the same political philosophy, and now you have this new group come in, and carbon tax, the oil patches in disrepair. As a British Columbian, I appreciate I think it was your energy minister who suggested that the thing to do for unemployed Albertans is to move to British Columbia for a while and get a job. Come, Albertans, bring your money, bring your assets. We welcome you with open arms.
Yeah, so that was at a speech yesterday that she was giving, and our energy minister, when she was being questioned about people who are losing their jobs in the oil patch, in the resources sector, what can they do? And she suggested, in the meantime, maybe they can go and find a job in British Columbia until the situation gets better here in Alberta. And so I'm thinking, is that our new jobs plan in Alberta? Just go move to BC for a while? Everybody with a family or even without a family knows when you uproot your life and you move somewhere else, it's not so easy sometimes to move back. And if the taxes are, get higher and higher in Alberta, which is the trend it seems like we're going on, maybe people aren't going to want to move back. So I'm not sure that should necessarily be the jobs plan for our province. But that's interesting times.
Interesting politics indeed. Now, Woody, my piece of news kind of relates. I'm hoping you can help fill in some of the blanks here. But yesterday, the Liberal government in Ottawa announced how they're going to appoint senators, a blue ribbon panel identifying wonderful, nonpartisan, but sort of politically smart Canadians. One wonders how they're going to find enough of these people. And out of the blue, my premier, Christy Clark, comes out and says on Twitter right away, we're not going to participate. We want no part of this. The Senate must either reform or die, essentially. This was a shock to me, who once brought a 30-foot-tall inflated senator abolishment balloon to British Columbia. It may or may not look like a certain senator who may or may not have been from Prince Edward Island for legal reasons. We have to say it that way. But, when we brought that out, the NDP helpfully did a big debate. It brought up forward a debate in the legislature, and the BC Liberals, Clark's own government, fought any idea of abolishing the Senate. And yet now I've got a reform or die Brad Wall-like statement from Christy Clark. So what's going on? Of all the premiers to buck Prime Minister Trudeau this early on, I would have put Clark at probably second place behind Kathleen Wynne as least likely to do so. How's this playing in Ottawa?
Well, it depends on who you talk to, Jordan. Look, from where we sit, obviously the taxpayers, our big problem with the Senate is this is not an elected body. These people have no more right to pass laws than you or I do. I don't want to disparage the individuals. There's some nice people in there that mean well, but again, they don't have any mandate. So when the Liberals presented this as somehow some revolutionary reform and going to change everything, I think that just doesn't fly. This is the proverbial lipstick on a pig. That's the quote that's been out there. You can put the lipstick on, it doesn't change the fact it's a pig. And this institution is not going to be fixed by having a panel rather than the Prime Minister himself pick. So yeah, it is a bit curious that Premier Clark spoke out. Obviously, we know where Brad Wall stands on this. You've had a lot of premiers get a lot of mileage out of saying, well, we're not going to touch the Senate, or we want to get rid of it. And of course, nothing ever is going to get done unless we have some input from the public, which is why groups like ours, and to give credit to federal New Democrats, they want to have a referendum to see what people think, to see whether we want to get rid of this institution. Let's stop guessing about what people think, and let's ask them. And we know that a referendum is not enough. You have to have consensus. The Supreme Court told us that, but it's certainly the first step. You can't get anywhere without that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, the Taxpayers Federation, we're for abolition, but we're for a vote really on the future of the Senate. Let's take it to the people. We certainly live in an era where I think most of us are better educated on Senate politics than ever before. And it's probably time to bring that to the people for a vote.
And, bringing issues to the people for a vote in general, it does increase public awareness of these issues, right? So if people aren't, paying attention now, which I think a lot of people are on the Senate anyway, but if they aren't, a referendum gives people a really great reason and great opportunity to get educated on these issues. It's like that's the beauty of these sort of direct democracy measures of having referenda, citizens initiative, recall, all the great stuff you have in your province, Jordan, that we want in our provinces. I mean, it allows people to directly get involved. They have a direct stake, right? They're sort of get out of that voter apathy. My votes, or whatever I say is not going to make a difference, and they have a stake and they get more involved, and that's a huge benefit to this kind of stuff too.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I find a lot of the time, Paige, there are folks who they just don't like referenda. They're afraid of direct democracy. They think it's somehow dangerous. We're obviously pretty big fans of direct democracy, but even if you aren't, surely you have to agree that something as big an issue as changing the way our country is governed with the Senate, surely an issue like that is something that's worth having a referendum from. Even if you don't think you should have them every 6 months, which we might like, surely every 5 or 10 years there's a big enough issue that comes along that's worth having a referendum so you can have a national conversation about that kind of thing.
Yeah, and being afraid of a referendum is just being afraid of what the people think, which is, inherently wrong because the government works for the people and not the other way around. But I do think sometimes they forget that a little bit.
Yeah, and look, the CTF, we've been on winning sides of referenda, we've been on losing sides of referenda. Here in BC, obviously, we led the No Translink tax campaign, scuttled a sales tax for cities, and we won that. And we lost in the 2000s. We lost twice on democratic reform, single transferable vote. The CTF was big supporters of that, and that twice went down to defeat. So it's not like we're hypocrites here saying, or that we have some sort of magic wand that the populace always agrees with us. We've taken our lumps in these campaigns too, but we respect the fact that people deserve to be consulted. And people vote anyways. Every 4 years, they check a box for an MP. There's no reason why you couldn't add some referenda to that voting process. Same with the mayors, MLAs. There's lots of opportunities there to vote and not actually increase costs on taxpayers to do it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I've always found it a really weird argument when people say, well, we can't trust the voters with a referendum. I mean, they're not informed enough. They don't know the issues. It could be risky. Yeah, we trust them to elect the politicians to make those decisions. So I don't know how it is on the one hand, they're reliable. We can trust them to elect our leaders, but we can't trust them to make decisions directly. Seems like a really odd contradiction.
Just a little condescending.
A little condescending, absolutely. All right, well, let's get rolling with the main event here. Aaron Wudrick is the federal director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. He's literally our man in Ottawa. While thousands of people in the capital wake up every morning thinking about how they can spend more of our tax money, lonely Aaron Wudrick wakes up and thinks about how he can save us some dough. For the first time in 10 years, we have someone other than Stephen Harper in the Prime Minister's chair. And so today we're going to talk about what's on Justin Trudeau's agenda, what it will mean for taxpayers. And what we did is we actually asked our supporters across the country to send us questions that they wanted Aaron to address. Amusingly, we got a few questions yelling at Aaron for Justin Trudeau's priorities. Aaron does not set the priorities for government. He is not Justin Trudeau. However, he can comment on it. He's keeping close tabs and trying to find some daylight for us on various issues. If you want to become a supporter of the CTF, it's very simple. Go to taxpayer.com. On the right-hand side of the website, you'll see a place where you can join us. And it's free. You stay involved with us, and we send you action updates on things like this. All right. So, Aaron, we had lots of questions about the Trudeau's nanny situation. I always thought that he'd bring in the nanny state, not the state nanny. But we'll use this question from Gerald Hartwick of Peterborough, Ontario. During the campaign, Mr. Trudeau vigorously opposed taxpayers footing the bill for wealthy Canadians' childcare. How is that different from what he's doing now?
Yeah, it's an excellent point, right? There's two separate issues here from where we see. One is the hypocrisy. Here you've got a guy who, running during the campaign, explicitly said that wealthy Canadians, wealthy families like his and like Stephen Harper's don't need help with their childcare. He was referring to those childcare checks, the universal childcare benefit that some of us, Jordan and I, we receive. We've got kids, so we receive those checks. So it is hypocritical for him to say, well, wealthy people who aren't me don't need help, but now I'm Prime Minister, I expect taxpayers to pay for all of my childcare. So there's the hypocrisy angle there, and I think that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and frankly, I think they've recognized that now. The other issue, though, is the total cost, right? From where we sit as a Taxpayers Federation, what we care about is, are taxpayers going to be on the hook for this? Are we going to be out of pocket any more money? If the Trudeau household wants to rejig its staff so that it has, one less person in the kitchen or one less housekeeper, and instead use that on childcare, I don't think that's a real problem. I don't think, we as Canadians need to micromanage their household budget. As long as they can assure that taxpayers are not paying any extra beyond what's agreed on, I don't think it's a problem.
All right.
Yeah, and I think the interesting is the attention brought to this, I think, has forced them into that box. It sounds like, when they fired their chef or the 24 Sussex chef that they were planning to keep all the other staff. Now it sounds like, according to Kate Purchase, his communications director, that they've rejigged that a bit. So, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I guess we'll have to watch and see. But it seems like the public pressure has brought that to bear.
Absolutely.
All right, I've got a question from Carol Tennant in Chilliwack, BC. She asks you, Aaron, now that Justin Trudeau has outlined his tax plan, we find out that the benefits that were intended to be directed to the middle class will not actually be received by the middle class. So how does this justify the new plan when it will only help a few people?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a bit of sleight of hand going on with the Liberals' tax plan. To be fair, they are promising one thing that is fairly broad. They're promising an income tax cut for the middle bracket. So if you make between $44,000 to $89,000 a year, you're going to see a 1.5% cut on your taxes. So that's fairly good news, and frankly, something they should be applauded for, because we didn't see that with the last government. But of course, there's a catch. There's a lot of other bad stuff coming along with that. There are a number of other tax breaks and tax relief that are going to be canceled. So it's questionable about whether, as Carol says, are we going to be better off? The other question is, who's the middle class? Who are we talking about here? Under this Liberal plan, anybody who makes less than $44,000 is not going to see a dime. So if you are a lower income person, you're not benefiting at all from this plan. You may feel you're middle class, but if you don't make the right amount of money, you're not going to see anything under this plan. So, it is a little bit disingenuous for them to frame this as somehow a win-win for the middle class. They're giving up a lot of things. They're talking about taking away income splitting. They're talking about rolling back the TFSA limits that millions and millions of Canadians use to plan for their futures. And they're all, of course, going to increase taxes on the wealthiest. And when we talk about the wealthiest, that's another interesting thing, is they're not talking about millionaires here. For a lot of people, making $200,000 a year in your household, if you live in downtown Vancouver, you live in downtown Toronto, you're basically middle class. I mean, you're certainly not starving on the street, but you're also not, you don't have a luxury yacht, you don't have a top hat and a monocle. And for the Liberals to make it sound like, average families, if you've got two kids and you make around $200,000 and you live in downtown Toronto, you're doing okay, but you don't have tens of thousands of dollars to spare. So I think they need to be careful about trying to frame it as there's all these wealthy people. Really, they're talking about a handful of super millionaires, but that's not who's going to be paying most of the bill on these things.
So do we have an idea about, after all of these policies are through, is it going to be a win for the middle class? Are they going to be better off? Or do you think after all of the different tax credits and stuff are canceled, are they going to be worse off? Or do we just not have enough details to tell yet?
No, I mean, the Liberals are basically saying they have a plan to roll in together. For example, they're going to stop the childcare benefit checks, which go to every Canadian family right now, and they're going to skew it to means test it. That in itself is maybe not a bad thing. I mean, if we're going to agree that you have to support childcare, it should be based on your need. But the catch is, is everyone going to be better off when you take into consideration all the stuff that's canceled? So we don't really know yet. The bigger concern, of course, that we have is they're going to spend a lot of money. They're planning on running deficits. They're talking about running even bigger deficits now than they pledged. And all that means is taxes down the road that we have to pay back. So, people can't be fooled by what's dangling right in front of them. There is going to be a lot to pay if they do not backtrack on their promise to spend a lot more than we can afford.
Yeah. Hey, Aaron, I've been reading Trudeau's autobiography, Common Ground. And don't ruin it for me. He's just decided to run in Papineau, and he's just met a wonderful woman named Sophie. So don't spoil for me how all that turns out. But what I'm intrigued in it is he talks a lot about this income inequality. And, obviously he, lived in 24 Sussex growing up, wealthy parents. He didn't lack for anything. But Papineau is he claims it's the poorest riding, the poorest electoral district in all of Canada. And he talks about this inequality of a chain link fence across one corner of the riding that separates the poor people in Papineau from the rich people in Mont-Royal. Now, I don't know Quebec, so I've no idea if that's more metaphorical or real. But how do we square this kind of philosophical sense that he has that the middle class is underserved with the similar philosophy that he has of being evidence-based, and the evidence showing that the middle class really isn't as bad off as Trudeau claims, that incomes have been rising over the past 20 years. Hillary Clinton calls Canada's middle class an actually example for the Americans to follow. Like, how do we talk about these different philosophies in the same guy, actually running contrary to one another?
Yeah, that's an open question. I've read his book too, and so there are certainly some contradictions in there. Look, there's nothing wrong with having a genuine compassion and care for the poor. Everybody, I think most people do to some extent. The question is, what are the right policies to get you there? Is it a question of, as we've seen from this government's rhetoric, and frankly from some of Mr. Trudeau's own commentary, is it really a question of do you help the poor by hurting the rich? Is it a Robin Hood thing? Is that the way we get there? I think a lot of evidence suggests that's not the case. And so you're absolutely right to point that it's not about trying to soak the rich in order to help the poor. Making the rich poor does not make the poor richer. And that is going to be a big test for this government. They've made some very big claims about being evidence-based. If that turns out to be, just the evidence that we like that happens to support our arguments, I think that's going to show that there wasn't much to that promise.
Yeah. All right, Ralph Jones from Alberta asks, Trudeau promised an increased pension or benefits to seniors. Any details?
Yeah, they've been a little bit vague on that. They're talking about an enhanced CPP for starters. Of course, that doesn't come free. We're going to have to pay for that, so it will be certainly coming off people's paychecks, and employers as well will have to pony up for that. They're also talking about rolling back old age security. It was raised under the Harper government to age 67, which is actually a very smart thing because, as most people will know, people are living longer these days and generally are healthier into old age, and frankly, some of them are working longer. And at the time, programs like OAS and also CPP, for that matter, were brought into being. People weren't living that long, so they'd retire and they'd have a year or two's worth. The state, other taxpayers would provide for 2 or 3 years. Now people are retiring at 65. They're living for 20 years. It's not sustainable, and so the last government did something very smart in moving it up, and frankly, over a long period of time. They were not changing it tomorrow so people can plan. It doesn't kick in for about 15 or 20 years. So the people who would be affected are only in their 40s now, and they have plenty of time to adjust. So the Liberals, pledging to walk back that age eligibility is frankly cynical. It's bad economics. It's going to be very expensive, and we certainly hope that they back off of that. The last thing I'd say in terms of benefits for seniors is their pledge to roll back the tax-free savings account from $10,000 a year to $5,500. That is bad news for seniors that are looking for another way to protect their savings, protect their investments. They can't have it both ways. It's very odd for them to claim, well, seniors don't need this money, so we're going to scale back TFSAs, but they're not saving enough, so we're also going to enhance CPP. Really, it's a question of who's going to decide what the best way to save is. Is it government, or is it individual Canadians and their families? And I think most people will agree they have a better sense of their own needs and their families' needs than any government, especially in Ottawa, might have.
TFSA thing I find so frustrating because, why would a government ever want to discourage saving? Like, it just, if you look at the numbers on how Canadians save, it's pretty consistent across North America, we don't have a lot of money to save by and large. Especially people in my generation. So if we're saving, it's a good thing. It's almost kind of an exceptional thing. It's something that should be encouraged. It just really grinds my gears. I have another.
One more point on that. On the CPP side, the age. Why are we bucking the greatest fictional Democratic president of all time, Frank Underwood? He's reforming entitlements. I don't understand why we're bucking that. It's No,
we're extremely entitled to our entitlements. I live in the capital of entitlements, Jordan. So there's nowhere more entitled in the world than Ottawa.
Yeah. So I just want to, before I ask the next question, which was sent in by one of our supporters, I'll remind everybody there's a sidebar. And you can ask questions as well. So we did have our supporters send in questions in advance. We emailed them about that. Jordan told you about how you can become a supporter, but on the sidebar here, the conversation we're having, you can also write /Q and it'll show up as a question and we can ask that to Aaron live here as well. So my question, the next one is from Frank Gu of Burlington, Ontario, and he's got a theory about higher taxes and rising debt. So he writes, incurring debt raises taxes on future citizens with little, if any, penalty for the politician who raises them. And he notes that politicians are long gone from office before the tab comes due on their debt. So this is a big question for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. But Aaron, if you can sum up, how can we change this system?
By donating to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and ensuring that we are fighting for you. No, look, this is an excellent question, and it speaks to a problem with politics. It's not because politicians are all necessarily bad people. Some of them are, but most of them have good intentions for sure. The point is their incentives are all wrong. They have no incentive to do anything for the long term because they'll get no credit for it. And so it's very easy for them to put off hard decisions and simply let somebody else 10, 20, 30 years down the road clean up the mess. This is exactly the reason we have the federal government and most provinces just creaking under a debt load that we pay billions every year for in interest, because politicians 10, 20, 30 years ago decided that they get more bang for the buck, they have a better chance of getting reelected, of making people happy today by spending money they didn't have. So I don't have an easy answer for Frank other than, the public also holds this power in their hands. If we demand politicians explain to us the long-term consequences of what they're doing, if we don't reward them for short-term decisions, they'll be more likely to behave differently.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Rob Thayer writes, I've managed to provide creative, honest, and effective services to all my clients for over 40 years, and I've been completely accountable. Better yet, I've given successful delivery services to them that met or exceeded their demands. Why can't government do the same? That might be more of a comment.
Yeah. Well, no, but it's a great question. Again, this comes back to a lot of folks who criticize our approach to saying, individuals and markets are better at making decisions about things. They say, well, sometimes they get it wrong. We can only trust government to do it. And I think that's confusing good intentions, again, with the ability to do things. Are governments, again, really better placed to know your specific circumstances? Governments are a blunt instrument. They have a really hard time tailoring things to you, your community, the specific circumstances you find yourself in. And so, when you put the power to make those decisions in government's hands, you take it away from individuals. Government's not going to be able to get it right for anybody. No matter how hard they try, they just can't do it. And so, I think the point there is to get government to do less. What they do, they should do well, but they should try and do everything, or they end up doing nothing well.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, so I have a question for you from Prince Edward Island, all the way over from there. Arnold Sutherland from PEI asks, in order to be revenue generating for other social and infrastructure programs, would it not make more sense to raise the tax on the upper 10 or 20%, not just the upper 1%?
So interesting question. So I guess the assumption there is that we're short on tax revenue to start with. I dispute that. I think if you are a person who thinks that the federal government spends $300 billion a year, if you think that there's no waste to be found in there, you have more faith in government than I don't think that we're short on revenue. So I dispute the point we need to raise taxes at all. He does make an interesting point about should we spread the burden more evenly. I think that there's something to that, in that you can't ask everybody at the top to pay for everything. That's why, frankly, flatter tax rates are better because there's no disincentive to earn more money. In fact, and plenty of studies show us that in places like Alberta, until recently anyway, where taxes are flatter, the rich actually pay more of the tax. People who are wealthy pay more of the overall tax burden because there's more of them. But whereas if you go to provinces like most of the Atlantic provinces, where you have very high tax rates on the wealthy, guess who ends up paying most of the tax? Middle and lower class people, because there's fewer wealthy people to pay tax at all. So I think it's attractive to some people to say, well, make wealthier people pay more tax, but it's actually better to just try to have more wealthy people and tax them less. They carry more of the load, and then middle and lower class people don't have to pay as much.
Yeah.
And the C.D. Howe Institute just had a fiscal study on the Trudeau tax plan, and isn't the finance minister a former C.D. Howe?
Yeah, that's a very interesting eyebrow raiser yesterday. Is Bill Morneau, who's the new Liberal finance minister, he was the chair of the CD Howe Institute, and that institute yesterday put out a study saying Mr. Morneau's government is $4 billion short on its tax planning. So that is going to be very interesting. I have to feel a bit sympathetic for Mr. Morneau. It's got to be a little bit awkward that the think tank that you were the chair of is now poking a giant hole in your government's plan. But maybe the good thing is, Mr. Morneau obviously thinks highly of the C.D. Howe Institute. He wouldn't have been the chair otherwise. So maybe he'll listen very carefully to what they have to say and cause them to maybe have a rethink about some of their spending plans.
Yeah. And you know what happens? As long as, I guess we'll talk about Atlantic Canada or the Maritimes because Arnold is from PEI. What happens when you raise those tax rates, the people who fall into that top 20% tax rate, those are a lot of the small business owners, right? And so it becomes less lucrative for people to set up businesses in those provinces. And I think that the Atlantic provinces are a great example. That's where my family's from. That's where a lot of people who I know, a lot of my family and friends would like to live, but they don't live there because the income tax rates are so high. The tax burden overall is very, very high, and it's just not a good place to set up a business and raise a family because you get so little back. And I mean, it's a beautiful place, like a beautiful part of the country, but it's really challenging there. So I think that when you look at the stats, it's quite surprising who actually falls into the top 20%. That's a lot of people, and those small business owners do almost always fall into that bracket. So we want to make sure that in your province you're encouraging small businesses to start up. That's a lot of the backbone of our economy. So we want to make sure that that's coming into play as well, I think, when we're crafting these policies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also, we have to acknowledge that whatever you think of the wealthy, they are already paying a substantial amount of tax. I mean, the top 20% of income earners, so the people who earn 20% of all income, I think they pay something like 75% of the tax. Like, it's a huge number. It is not as if they are escaping without paying their fair share, however you define that. And as you say, the harder you make it for people to run a business, to be successful, the less likely you are to attract people there, and the harder it is for everyone, because you get trapped in this vicious cycle where if you only got a handful of rich people left, you want to squeeze them tighter and tighter until there's none left, and then what do? Who's paying the bills, right?
Yeah, and the other thing that's really borne out in the data, and the C.D. Howe report talks about this, is that the very wealthy are very good at avoiding taxes. So even on a practical level, it doesn't really work. What you end up doing is shrinking your tax base, especially if you got a situation like the Maritimes versus somewhere like Alberta, or at least how Alberta has been for some time. They can move, and there is a better place to go, and so they will go. They have the ability to have mobility, right? They've got the money to do that.
They've got the resources, yeah.
And they're very wealthy, they're up there. If they aren't, intelligent enough to do it themselves, they can hire people who can do it for them. They can find out the best way to avoid paying those taxes. So what you end up, and this is sort of borne out in that C.D. Howe report as well, is you end up with actually a smaller revenue take. Yep. Because you're actually getting less from those people. So we need to remember, there's those sort of ideological pushes, that tax the rich kind of a push that maybe instinctively you think, this is the right thing to do. But practically you end up with less revenue. So it's not actually a good idea. It just doesn't make sense.
Exactly. It's very seductive, Paige, right? People have good intentions because they think, well, these people can afford it. And then they say, well, wealthy people have ways to hide their money. We should just crack down on that. Let's just crack down on it. And my point there is, even if you manage to do that, you're never going to attract rich people. They're never going to come here. I mean, we can attract wealthy people to move here, bring their resources with them, and then pay taxes here. If you were to set up a system that was so draconian that you had no way to get out, you'd never attract anyone new. So again, it's self-defeating. Again, I understand why some people find it seductive, but it's misleading. You end up in a situation where nobody wins.
For Bill Morneau and C.D. Howe, it's the old saying, first comes the swearing in, then comes the swearing at. Rick Drury of Winnipeg has been watching the news out of Paris. I'd argue there hasn't been much news out of Paris, just a bunch of photo ops. It's been proposed that more should be done to develop alternative fuels and solar energy. Is our government even considering this, and at the same time replacing jobs that have been and will be lost in the oil sector? Aaron, if I could broaden that question, what the hell is going on in Paris?
Yeah, seriously, maybe we could ask one of the 383 Canadians who went, because we did send a larger delegation there than the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia combined. So for reference, for context for people, last year the Canadian delegation was about 70 people. Apparently we care about the environment 5 times more now, because we sent 5 times as many people. I don't know what that gets us in terms of morality points on the world
because
scale.
It's 2015, Aaron. Because it's 2015.
5 times less, because we're sending 5 times more people on a plane across.
Well,
on planes.
yeah, you could argue. Look, whatever your position on climate change, I don't see how it serves our interest to just, it's clearly a symbolic statement made by the new government saying we want to have as many people there as possible. I don't know how that achieves anything substantive. It does absolutely nothing to tackle the problem they claim to be there to solve. So, that's and it's disappointing. There is a cost involved, right? We're very interested to see what the total bill is to taxpayers for this giant photo op, which as of now has not come to any real substantive conclusion at all. So we're going to be watching that very carefully to see. They've actually given us some estimates about how much it will cost. So we'll be comparing that estimate to what the actual bill is down the road when the numbers come in. In terms of the green energy front and renewables, I would say if you really think that the government knows best about what the best areas are to innovate are, where there's profits to be made, I frankly don't think those types of entrepreneurs and experts in the field are the ones sitting in bureaucratic offices here in Ottawa. They're probably people in the field, and they're probably people who are innovating as we speak, whether or not there's a government there to tell them what they should be doing. So, talking about these miraculous green jobs, I live in Ontario. I can tell you we've had a government in Ontario that has been full bore in the tank on the green schemes for 12 years. It has been a complete and unmitigated disaster. In fact, the Auditor General came out earlier this week. They put out a report that said Ontarians, hope you're sitting down for this, since 2003, they have paid $37 billion more than they should have for energy costs in the province of Ontario. That adds up to about $500 per person per year, every year. So if you're a family of 4, that's about $2,000 a year, every year, as a result of these green energy schemes, which were supposed to, save the environment, create this whole new green economy, which has not materialized. So we have plenty of examples of it at hand. This is not just theory. It has not worked. Again, good intentions, the road to hell is paved with them. And so I think the federal government should take a long, hard look if it's even contemplating going down any road like that.
It's so frustrating here in Alberta because it's almost as if our premier is modeling her energy plans after Ontario. I mean,
yeah, you couldn't pick a worse one.
When I lived in Ontario, it was a have province, so it's just. Oh, it's so frustrating because, it's the same kind of stuff, right? Shutting down the coal-fired power plants, seeming very, very keen to dish out lots of corporate welfare to these green energy companies, and saying, oh, well, it's only going to have a very, very minimal impact on electricity prices, and sort of glazing over that. Look at Ontario. It's had at least a 70% hike. I mean, in the numbers that I've seen on peak times, I can't remember the exact year. I think it's from 2010 to 2015. I mean, it's 77% higher prices on peak times for electricity use. I mean, that is not a minimal jump. That is a
no. And especially we talk about it a lot of time in the context of families, right? Obviously, families have to pay their bills, and it's a big cost imposed on families. But think about the cost to business as well. I mean, Ontario is struggling with private sector jobs. They wonder why they're uncompetitive and businesses close up shop or leave and move to a nearby jurisdiction. Well, when Michigan or Quebec or New York is a short drive away, and your energy cost is a quarter or 20% of what you're paying in Ontario, that is a huge difference over a decade. And so the government, they seem mystified as to why Ontario is not a popular place to invest. Well, what do you expect when energy costs continue to go through the roof and there's absolutely no plan on the horizon to get them under control?
Yeah, and rural communities. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but I mean, I've been talking to some farmers and ranchers out here in Alberta that are really concerned about, the impacts of the carbon tax is going to have and the energy plan, on electricity prices. They've got to keep their water from freezing they have open water for the animals throughout the winter. Their fertilizer uses natural gas. I mean, there's so many of these costs that are associated that the government, I don't think, thinks about that are just going to go up. So anyway, it's frustrating from an Albertan perspective to be emulating Ontario. No offense, Ontario, but it hasn't worked out too well for you. So I have a question for you, though, from here in Alberta, Peter Middleton. This is, I think, an important question really going forward into the next few years or perhaps next few decades. He's wondering if the Trudeau Liberals have made any statements or promises on addressing the billions of dollars of unfunded government union pension plans. Liabilities in there.
No, they haven't made any specific comments on that. We have a new Treasury Board president. The Treasury Board president is the person who is responsible for overseeing the civil service here in Ottawa. He's a fellow by the name of Scott Bryson, a Liberal from Nova Scotia. He's generally seen as on the fiscally conservative side of things. So it'll be interesting to see what his approach is. He's certainly taken a different tone with the public sector unions here. The previous government was, depending on how you look at it, hardline. We certainly appreciated the fact that they took a very tough line and frankly looked out for taxpayer interests because, while it's the union's job to try and get the most for their members, whatever their members get, the rest of Canadians are paying for. And so it's the job of the government of Canada to make sure that taxpayers are getting value for money. When it comes to the pension specifically, they are a bit of a sacred cow in the public sector. That is something that I think a lot of public sector unions would die on the hill over, no pun intended. But I think this government also is going to have to come to terms with the fiscal reality. There hasn't been a lot of good news for them on the horizon in terms of, whether it's the CD Howe report, whether it's the economy not doing as well as predicted. We just had news, for example, that the Navy ships are going to cost an extra $16 billion. I mean, the numbers just keep getting bigger and bigger across the board. They're going at some point going to have to take on defined benefit pensions one way or another. And frankly, the only sustainable path from where we sit is to move them to a defined contribution type plan, like we see in the private sector. You pay in, there's a matching contribution. Whatever the investment yields is what you get as your pension payout. We can't have these defined benefit plans because taxpayers could be on the hook for literally tens of billions of dollars going forward if there's not enough money in the pot.
Yeah, well, there's a reason why, defined benefit pension plans are almost non-existent in the private sector now, right? So. Yeah,
exactly. They're not realistic.
Yeah.
All right, we just have a couple minutes left, so let's do a little bit of rapid fire here if possible. Ken Hinton of Langley, BC. Langley, the center of the Canadian universe, wants to know what we're doing to track the cost of Syrian immigration. Is it true that these folks will get more than Canadian pensioners?
Well, I can't speak to the pensioner thing. I think it depends on the situation. There has been some talk about what refugees can get in terms of emergency health care and things like that. We're certainly keeping tabs on the cost. That was something that I brought up. Frankly, during the election campaign, I was right when I was asked about it. The Liberals said it would cost $150 million. I said, is the middle of an election campaign on the back of a napkin the best way to calculate these things? Lo and behold, it turns out the actual cost is going to be something like quadruple that. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean we don't do it. This is a life or death issue, but it just goes to show you can't make these sorts of promises on the back of a napkin and expect the numbers to pan out at the end.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next question quickly. Gustav Morrow asks, why is there still no all-party group working on simplifying the tax laws? Has Trudeau hinted at any tax code simplifications?
There's no all-party group, but one encouraging part of the Liberal platform is they did pledge to do a sort of, they didn't call it a core review, but a top-to-bottom review of the tax code to look for efficiencies. If that means lower, flatter, simpler taxes, we'll be supportive of it. There are some things, some types of tax measures, we could have better ones that will benefit more Canadians to be fair, not play favorites. So that is something they pledged, and we'll certainly be looking to push them on that in the coming months.
Okay. Jerry Laframboise of Ottawa wants to know the age-old question, do Ontario taxpayers have more to fear from Kathleen Wynne or Justin Trudeau? Aaron, do you want to die by fire or drowning?
Well, look, I guess in the one case they've got plenty of experience already, so I don't know if they're desensitized if there's any money left. It is interesting because as people may know, the partisan stripe doesn't always give you an indication of how a party's going to govern. The Ontario Liberals have governed in a very different way than the last Liberal government under Jean-Chrétien and Paul Martin, which was fairly middle of the road, and it deserves a lot of credit for paying down the debt and eliminating the deficit. We would hope Justin Trudeau would go down that Liberal path and not follow the Ontario Liberal path. I think the results speak for themselves. Ontario is a mess in just about every measure. in terms of its prospects going forward and the cost to individual Ontarians. So, all I would ask Ontarians to do is certainly hold the new Prime Minister to account, encourage him to follow the Chrétien-Martin liberal path and not the Wynne-McGuinty liberal path.
All right, quickly, Harold Stewart of Ontario, worried about interest rates rising. He asks, what can be done to lower the potential of national bankruptcy if interest rates rise to the former levels of 15%?
Oh, well, I think the most obvious answer to that is to pay down some of our federal debt. Our federal debt's sitting at $612 billion, or I think it's 614 actually. I'm a little outdated on the number. Costs us $26 billion a year in interest. That's at historically low rates. As you can imagine, if rates jump, suddenly we're looking at 30, 40, 50, 60 billion. That's a lot of bread. That is going to eat into all the other things that we could spend that money on, things that Canadians actually need. So we encourage this government to grab the bull by the horns, start paying some of that down as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that in British Columbia, for every 1% interest rates rise, it costs the provincial government something like $125 million. And that's in a pretty decent debt situation compared to the god-awful state of Ontario or even federally. Finally, Scott Ingraham of Halifax wants to know, how is the Kearney report figures on the Irving shipbuilding contract going to affect the workers and taxpayers of Halifax, Nova Scotia? This, of course, is the massive shipbuilding contract handed out by the previous government.
Yeah, so essentially all this report says is the old shipbuilding plan, which is about 10 to 15 years old. Actually, I think it predates even the Harper government. It basically said all the ships we're going to build were going to cost $14 billion. Well, the Kearney report says they're actually going to cost $30 billion. So that's a $16 billion difference right there. It's hard to, it's kind of staggering to look at because really, and I've only seen bits of the original sort of plan, they didn't factor in things like inflation or cost overruns or anything. They just kind of assumed everything was going to stay the same.
Details.
And so, yeah. So look, it is unfair. You can't pin this one all on the new government, certainly, and even to an extent on the last government because it's not theirs. What we can do is make sure that going forward, we cannot let this happen again. I mean, there needs to be a system put in place that ensures that the estimates for these sorts of things going forward are realistic, and so that we budget for them properly. Because I don't know where this new government plans on finding an additional $16 billion, but they're going to have to find some way to rejig their other plans and make up the difference or scale back what it is we plan to buy.
Yeah. Aaron, thanks for being here. Aaron is doing the Lord's work for taxpayers in Ottawa. So if you want to follow him on Twitter, @awudrick, or you can email him, awudrick@taxpayer.com. Thanks, Aaron. And when's the throne speech? Is it happening now or pretty quick?
I got about 15 minutes, so I'm good.
Oh, you're set. All right, Paige, time for Waste of the Week. What you got?
All right, I'll go quickly. So the Waste of the Week, it happened a few weeks ago here now in Alberta. We found out through some documents that were leaked to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. This is not something that taxpayers would normally be able to find out. The Alberta School Boards Association has been spending an absurd amount of money on things that are essentially staff perks. They don't benefit students at all. Generally, when you're trusting a taxpayer-funded organization with your tax dollars, you're hoping that money is spent in the classroom. Not so much for the documents that we were given for the Alberta School Boards Association. We found that they're expensing flights for their staff between Calgary and Edmonton. For anybody who doesn't live in this province, that's a drive. That's not a flight unless it is a blizzard or something and you absolutely can't drive. Hotel stays in the same cities. They're having their annual meetings at some of the most luxurious locations in Edmonton. One of them is a Fairmont, really ritzy places. But they also spent some money on some kind of hilarious stuff, one of which was an adult Easter egg hunt. Yes, an adult Easter egg hunt. That is what I said. Over $1,200 we've got here between 2012. Or no, that's actually in 1 year for the adult Easter egg hunt. I've got some of the expenses laid out right here. We've also got birthday gift cards. They get cake days for ASBA staff. In turn, on top of gifts and cake, they get Christmas gifts. They get a Christmas dinner. Of course, we mentioned their Easter egg hunt. They got to go to a Taste of Edmonton festival. They got tickets. They do team building and staff appreciation lunches. As I mentioned, they've got some the planning meetings at the luxurious locations. out of control, you know, all together, not including, because we don't have the prices for the flights and the hotel stays in the same city and all that kind of stuff, because they're not subject to freedom of information requests, which they should be, and that's what we're calling for. But on the little things like the Easter egg hunts and the fancy meetings, we found that they spent $41,164 between 2012 and 2014, and that's just on one document that we were leaked. So that could be just the tip of the iceberg here. So the money that could have been spent on classrooms, again, around $41,000, but finding out that adult Easter egg hunts are a thing, that's priceless.
$41,000, basically the cost of a special education assistant for a year in Alberta. This reminds me of a BC thing they used to have called the Special Recognition Cupboard. And co-workers for the BC government, Paige, if I thought you were doing a great job, I could actually go to email someone or go to a cupboard and give you a taxpayer-funded umbrella, a fancy jacket, a bag,
awesome.
Gift cards. Woody, there'd be a Starbucks gift card coming to you this Christmas, all paid for by taxpayers, cost millions of dollars. And then Mike Smith from the Vancouver province blew it up, much to the dismay of all of the guys who knew about this. So that is our waste of the week. Well, that's it for this episode of Tax Talk from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Be sure to follow Paige on Twitter at Paige McP, follow myself at Jordan Bateman, and follow Aaron at Aaron Wudrick. If you're watching this on Blab, be sure to subscribe to our feed. And if you're listening to this on iTunes later, please subscribe and feel free to give us a good rating. You can check out our website, taxpayer.com, for all the stuff that Paige has done on this waste story and all of our other work across the country. Tax Talk will return next week, Friday, December 11th, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, where we're going to give out our naughty and nice list for taxpayers. We're going to rope in some of our other directors from across the country. We're going to talk about who is naughty, who is nice, and our special guest. Yes, he's coming to town. Santa Claus, the jolly old elf himself, will be live on Blab with us, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, next Friday, December 11th. Pager, in TV, that's what they call a teaser.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite examples of private charity, Santa. There, I made it nerdy.
There you go. We're so nerdy. Have a great week, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.